The soldier's name does not matter. He is 19 years old, maybe 20. He comes from a small town in Iowa, or a farming village in Yorkshire, or a fishing community in Nova Scotia. He has been training for this moment for 2 years. He has learned to crawl under barbed wire while machine guns fire over his head. He has learned to jump from a landing craft into freezing water with 60 pounds of gear on his back. He has learned to kill, but none of that training has prepared him for the truth he will discover on the morning of June 6th, 1944. The truth is this: his life does not depend on his courage. His life does not depend on his sergeant, or his lieutenant, or even the general who sent him here. His life depends on a team of engineers he has never met, working on a problem he does not understand, building something that has never existed before in the history of human warfare. And if those engineers fail, he will die on the beach with his rifle empty and his throat burning for water, and no help coming from across the sea, because the help cannot reach him. There is no port. There is no way to unload the ships. There is only sand and bullets, and the slow realization that the invasion has become a trap. The coast of northern France stretches for hundreds of miles under the gray sky of the English Channel. From the air, it looks peaceful. Small villages huddle against the wind. Green fields roll back from the cliffs. Fishing boats bob in the harbors, where they have moored for centuries. But the men who study this coast in the winter of 1943 do not see peace. They see death. They see the Atlantic Wall, Adolf Hitler's 1,000-mile fortress of concrete and steel and artillery. They see the guns at Le Havre, capable of throwing a shell the weight of a small car 20 miles out to sea. They see the submarine pens at Cherbourg, roofed with reinforced concrete so thick that bombs bounce off like pebbles. They see the minefields and the beach obstacles and the barbed wire and the machine gun nests and the bunkers. But worst of all, they see something that is not there at all. They see the absence of ports. They see a 50-mile stretch of coastline where the water is too shallow for any real ship to approach the shore. They see tiny fishing harbors like Port-en-Bessin and Courseulles-sur-Mer, where the depth at low tide is measured in inches, not feet. They see the curse that will haunt every planner, every general, every soldier who will one day wade ashore under fire. There are no doors in this fortress, and you cannot invade a fortress without doors. Adolf Hitler understands the importance of ports better than any man alive. He has studied the failed invasions of history. He knows that Napoleon could not cross the Channel because he could not guarantee his supply lines. He knows that the Spanish Armada failed for the same reason. He knows that in modern warfare, an army without fuel and ammunition is not an army at all. It is a crowd of men with empty hands waiting to be killed. So Hitler has given special orders about the ports. Festungshafen, he calls them. Fortress harbors. Every major port on the French coast from Belgium to Spain has been designated a fortress that must be held to the last man and the last bullet. The garrisons in these ports are not ordinary soldiers. They are fanatics. They are elite troops who have sworn an oath to die rather than surrender. They have been told that the Führer himself watches their actions. They have been told that if they fail, their families will suffer. They will not run. They will not surrender. They will fight until the concrete crumbles around them and the last shell is fired. And if it becomes clear that they cannot hold, they have one final duty: demolition. Every dock, every crane, every warehouse, Every power station, every fuel tank, every railroad switch has been wired with explosives. The moment a German commander realizes his port is about to fall, he will push the detonator. He will turn years of construction into seconds of thunder and dust. He will leave the Allies nothing but rubble and twisted steel and the bitter knowledge that they have won nothing at all. The lesson of Dieppe burns in the memory of every Allied planner. August 19th, 1942, 6,000 Canadian and British troops land at the French port of Dieppe. They are brave men. They are well-trained men. They believe they can seize the port and hold it long enough to prove that a direct assault is possible. They are wrong. The Germans are waiting. The guns open fire before the first landing craft reaches the beach. The water turns red. The bodies pile up on the shingle. Tanks that were supposed to support the infantry get stuck on the beach, their tracks spinning uselessly against the stones. Men huddle behind sea walls while German machine gunners fire from the windows of hotels and apartment buildings. By noon, it is over. Nearly 2/3 of the 6,000 men who went ashore are dead, wounded, or captured. The survivors come home in small boats, their eyes empty, their hands shaking, their mouths unable to form words that could describe what they have seen. And the planners study the after-action reports with a horror that grows with every page. The lesson is not complicated. You cannot take a port from the front. The Germans have made sure of that. But you cannot invade Europe without a port. So what do you do? What do you do when the only answer is impossible and the only alternative is defeat? The men who must answer this question sit in a building so secret that even the taxi drivers who pass it every day do not know what happens inside. Norfolk House in St. James's Square, London. A nondescript building that could be an insurance office or a government bureaucracy. But inside, the walls are covered with maps. The floors are covered with papers. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of coffee that has been sitting too long. The men who work here do not go home at night. They sleep on cots in the corners of their offices. They eat sandwiches at their desks, while their eyes move across columns of numbers that never seem to add up to anything good. They are not soldiers, most of them. They are engineers. They are logistics experts. They are mathematicians and accountants and men who have spent their careers figuring out how many tons of supplies it takes to keep a single division moving for a single day. And they are staring at a number that makes them want to put their heads in their hands and weep. 3 million tons. In the first 90 days after the invasion, the Allied forces in France will need more than 3 million tons of supplies. 3 million tons of fuel, ammunition, food, medicine, spare parts, trucks, jeeps, ambulances, tanks, artillery shells, boots, uniforms, bandages, blood plasma, cigarettes, chocolate, letters from home. 3 million tons. Imagine the largest building in your city. Now imagine filling it with steel and concrete and gasoline until it bursts. Now imagine doing that 30 times. Now imagine moving all of that across an ocean and then across a beach and then into the hands of men who are fighting for their lives against the most powerful army the world has ever seen. The engineers do the math again and again, hoping for a different answer. The math does not change. 3 million tons. And no ports. The beaches can handle some of it. The landing craft can shuttle back and forth, carrying small loads from the ships to the shore. But the landing craft are slow. They are vulnerable. They are at the mercy of the weather and the tides and the German artillery that will be firing from the cliffs the moment the first boat touches sand. The engineers calculate the capacity of the beaches and the number of landing craft available and the time it will take to move 3 million tons under combat conditions. The answer comes back like a death sentence. It cannot be done. Not in 90 days, not in 180 days, not ever. The invasion will stall on the beaches. The men who land on the first day will fight with what they have in their hands and on their backs. When that runs out, they will fight with bayonets and knives and fists, and then they will die. And the reinforcements will be stuck on ships offshore, watching through binoculars as their friends are killed, unable to help, because there is no way to get from the ship to the shore. The Germans will bring their panzer divisions north from the south of France. They will bring their infantry divisions east from Germany. They will encircle the beachhead and squeeze until the last Allied soldier surrenders or dies. And the second front will be over before it really began. Europe will remain in Hitler's grip for another year, another 5 years, another decade. The war will go on until the cities of Germany are flattened by bombers, and the cities of Russia are crushed by tanks, and the world forgets what peace even looks like. All because of ports, all because of geography, all because no one could figure out how to build a door in a fortress that had none. And this is where the story takes its first strange and violent turn. Because the man who will figure it out is not an engineer. He is not a general. He is not a logistics expert. He is a politician. He is a man who has already lost one invasion because he did not understand the importance of supply lines. He is Winston Churchill, and he carries the memory of Gallipoli like a wound that will not heal. Gallipoli, 1915. Churchill's plan to knock Turkey out of the war by seizing the Dardanelles and capturing Constantinople. The troops landed on the beaches. They fought their way inland. They came within sight of their objectives, and then they stopped. They stopped because the supplies stopped. The ships offshore could not unload fast enough. The men on the beach ran out of water and ran out of ammunition and ran out of hope. The Turks counterattacked. The invasion turned into a siege. The siege turned into a stalemate. The stalemate turned into an evacuation. And Churchill's political career turned into ashes. He never forgot. He never forgave himself. And he never stopped thinking about the problem that had destroyed him. How do you supply an invasion when there is no port? For 25 years, the question haunted him. And now, in the darkest days of the Second World War, with the fate of Europe hanging in the balance, he thinks he has found the answer. In May 1942, Churchill sits in his study at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat. He is smoking a cigar and drinking whiskey and thinking about harbors. Not real harbors, artificial harbors. Harbors that can be built in pieces and towed across the channel and assembled on the enemy coast. Harbors with breakwaters made from old ships, sunk in place to calm the waves. Harbors with floating piers that rise and fall with the tide so that ships can unload in any weather. Harbors with roadways that stretch from the shore to the deep water, allowing trucks to drive directly from the ship to the beach. It sounds insane. It sounds like the fantasy of an old man who has spent too many years reading science fiction and drinking too much brandy. But Churchill does not care how it sounds. He picks up a pen and scribbles a memo to his chief of combined operations. The memo is only a few sentences long. It is written in Churchill's distinctive handwriting, the letters leaning forward as if they are in a hurry to get somewhere. It says something about piers and pontoons and floating roadways. It says something about building harbors where no harbors exist. It says something about the impossible becoming possible if only enough clever people put their minds to it. And then he sends it. He sends it out into the bureaucracy of war, where it will be read by men who have spent their lives learning why things cannot be done. They will read it and smile politely and set it aside. But Churchill does not let it go. He keeps pushing. He keeps asking questions. He keeps reminding them that Gallipoli happened because no one thought about supply lines until it was too late. He keeps telling them that this time will be different. This time, they will think about supply lines first. This time, they will build the door before they try to walk through it. Slowly, reluctantly, the engineers begin to listen. They begin to think about the impossible. They begin to wonder if maybe Churchill is not as crazy as he seems. They pull out their maps and study the Normandy coast again. This time, they look at it with new eyes. They notice something the Germans have missed. The beaches here are not good for a landing. That is why the Germans have put their strongest defenses elsewhere, at Calais, where the channel is narrowest, at the great ports, where they expect the assault. But the beaches have a hidden advantage. The seabed. It is flat. It is firm. In some places, it is actually chalk, the same white chalk that gives this coastline its name. And chalk can hold weight. You could sink something heavy into that chalk. You could build something on top of it. You could build something that has never been built before. The engineers look at each other across the map. They do not smile, they are not happy, they are terrified. Because they know what they are about to attempt. They are about to build a harbor. A complete, fully functional harbor. They are going to build it in secret, in pieces, in shipyards and construction sites all over Britain, all over. They are going to tow those pieces across one of the busiest and most dangerous waterways on Earth, under the noses of German reconnaissance aircraft and U-boats and E-boats and mines. They are going to assemble those pieces on an enemy shore while artillery shells fall around them and machine guns fire from the dunes. And they are going to do it all in 72 hours. 72 hours, from the moment the first soldier touches the sand to the moment the first truck drives off the first ship onto the first pier. 72 hours to do what normally takes years. 72 hours to build a miracle. The project is given a code name. Mulberry. Innocent. Harmless. A fruit that grows on trees and tastes sweet in summer. No German intelligence officer reading intercepted messages about mulberries will suspect that he is reading about the greatest engineering project in the history of warfare. But that is exactly what it is. The mulberry harbors will be the size of the port of Dover, one of the busiest harbors in England. They will have breakwaters 2 miles long, made from concrete caissons the size of apartment buildings. They will have piers stretching half a mile out to sea, supported by steel legs that sink into the seabed. They will have floating roadways connected by hinges that flex with the waves, allowing trucks to drive from ship to shore in any weather. They will have anti-aircraft guns mounted on the breakwaters to defend against German bombers. They will have accommodations for the men who work them, kitchens to feed them, medical facilities to treat them. They will be, in short, a city on the water. A city that will appear off the coast of Normandy as if by magic, built in secret and delivered in pieces and assembled under fire. A city that will supply the armies of liberation. A city that will make victory possible. A city that does not yet exist anywhere except in the minds of a few engineers who have not slept in weeks, and in the imagination of an old man who still dreams about Gallipoli and still believes he can make it right. The first challenge is size. The breakwaters must be enormous. They must stretch for miles. They must withstand the full fury of the English Channel, a body of water famous for its violent storms and unpredictable swells. The engineers calculate the forces involved, and the numbers make them want to walk away. The waves in a winter storm can hit a breakwater with a force of 15 tons per square meter. 15 tons. That is a fully loaded London bus smashing into every single square yard of the structure over and over again for hours. Nothing in the history of harbor engineering has ever been designed to survive forces like that in open water. Harbors are built in sheltered bays, behind headlands, in protected natural anchorages. They are not built on exposed coastlines facing the full fetch of the Atlantic Ocean. But there is no choice. The Germans hold all the sheltered bays. The exposed coast is the only place where the Allies can land without walking directly into the guns of the Atlantic Wall. So the engineers must design breakwaters that can survive the worst the Channel can throw at them. They must design them without knowing what the worst will be. They must design them on paper, and then build them in concrete and steel and hope that the paper is right. If the paper is wrong, the breakwaters will collapse. The harbor will disintegrate. The invasion will fail. And millions of people will die. The second challenge is time. A conventional harbor takes years to build. The great breakwater at Plymouth took more than a century. The Allies do not have years. They do not have months. They have days. The Mulberry harbors must be operational within 72 hours of the first landing. That means the breakwaters must be prefabricated. They must be built in Britain, towed across the Channel, and then sunk into position according to a schedule measured not in months but in hours. The engineers calculate the number of components they will need. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Each component must be built to exact specifications. Each component must be transported to the coast and loaded onto barges and towed across the Channel in the right order at the right time. If one component arrives late, the whole schedule falls apart. If one component is damaged in transit, there is no time to build a replacement. If one component sinks in the wrong place, the entire harbor geometry is thrown off. The engineers look at the requirements and shake their heads. It is impossible. They say this aloud, in meetings, in reports, in private conversations with their superiors. It is impossible. But the generals do not want to hear impossible. The generals want to know how many components they will have, and when they will arrive, and whether the harbors will be ready in time. So the engineers go back to their drawing boards and try to find a way to make the impossible merely difficult. The third challenge is secrecy. The Mulberry harbors cannot be hidden. They are too big. The concrete caissons alone are the size of 6-story buildings. They will be built in shipyards and construction sites all over Britain. Thousands of workers will see them. Thousands of dock workers will handle them. Thousands of sailors will tow them. The Germans have spies in Britain. They have reconnaissance aircraft flying over the Channel. They have radar stations on the French coast, watching every movement of every ship. If they figure out what the Allies are planning, they will concentrate their bombers on the construction sites. They will mine the approaches to the assembly areas. They will prepare artillery to target the harbors the moment they appear off the Normandy coast. The entire operation depends on the Germans not understanding what they are seeing until it is too late. So the engineers must build their miracle in plain sight, while somehow making it invisible. They must disguise the caissons as something else. They must spread the construction across dozens of sites so that no single location reveals the scale of the project. They must control the workers, prevent them from talking, prevent them from writing letters home, prevent them from mentioning to their wives and girlfriends what they are building. They must create a web of deception so thick that the Germans cannot see through it. And they must do all of this while the clock ticks toward the invasion date and the pressure builds toward breaking point. As the winter of 1943 turns into spring, the plans begin to take shape. Drawings cover the walls of the secret offices in London. Models sit on tables under sheets, waiting for inspection. The engineers argue, they fight, they run calculations again and again, looking for the flaw that will kill the project. The arguments get loud, doors slam, men walk out, and then walk back in because they have nowhere else to go. The pressure is unbearable. These men are not soldiers. They did not sign up to be shot at. They signed up to build things, to solve problems, to apply their knowledge to the practical challenges of war. But now they are being asked to solve a problem that has no solution. They are being asked to build something that has never been built. They are being asked to do it on a schedule that allows no mistakes, no delays, no failures, and they know that if they fail, men will die. Thousands of men, tens of thousands. The young men from Iowa and Yorkshire and Nova Scotia, who are training on the beaches of southern England, running up and down the sand until their legs burn and their lungs ache, will die because the engineers could not figure out how to build a harbor in time. That knowledge sits in the room with them every day. It sits on their shoulders while they work. It follows them home at night and waits for them when they wake up. It is the heaviest weight any of them has ever carried. The first concrete is poured in the spring of 1944. A worker at a construction site in Scotland watches the gray slurry flow into the wooden forms and wonders what he is building. It is too big for a ship. It is too boxy for a boat. It has no engines, no rudder, no place for a crew. It looks like a building, but a building has no business being built in a dry dock. He asks his foreman what it is. The foreman shrugs and says it is something for the Navy. The worker does not believe him. It is not a Navy thing. It is too strange, too massive, too alien. But he does not ask again. He has learned not to ask questions. He has learned that the men who ask questions disappear from the site and are replaced by new men who do not ask questions. So he works. He pours concrete. He bends steel. He welds joints. He puts in 18-hour days, 7 days a week, until his hands bleed and his back screams, and he cannot remember what it felt like to sleep in a real bed. He does not know what he is building. He does not know that he is building a door in a fortress that has no doors. He does not know that the survival of the young men on the beaches depends on the quality of his welds and the strength of his concrete. He does not know that history is being made in this Scottish shipyard. that the fate of Europe is being decided by the sweat of his brow and the calluses on his hands. He only knows that he is tired and he is cold and he wants to go home. But he stays. He stays because the foreman is watching. He stays because the war is not over and the work is not done. He stays because somewhere across the channel, on a coast he has never seen, a beach is waiting for a harbor that does not yet exist. 400,000 men are gathering in southern England. They are Americans, British, Canadians, Poles, French, Norwegians, Dutch. They are paratroopers and infantrymen, tankers and medics, engineers and chaplains. They are young, most of them, barely old enough to shave. They do not know where they are going. They do not know when they will leave. But they know it will be soon because they can feel it in the air, in the tension, in the way the officers stop smiling and the chaplains start holding more services. They train on the beaches of southern England, running up and down the sand until their legs burn and their lungs ache. They practice loading and unloading, climbing and descending, shooting and moving. They write letters home that they know might be their last. They stare at the photographs of girlfriends and wives and children and try to memorize every detail. They pray, some of them, to gods they have not spoken to since they were children. They are afraid. They are very afraid. But they do not run. They do not hide. They do not desert. They stay because the work is not done and the war is not over. And somewhere across the channel, on a coast they have never seen, a beach is waiting for them. They do not know about the harbors. They do not know about the concrete caissons and the steel pontoons and the floating roadways. They do not know that engineers in London are killing themselves to solve problems these soldiers have never heard of. They only know that when the time comes, they will climb into the landing craft and cross the channel and wade ashore into the bullets and the bombs and the blood. They will do it because they have been told to do it. They will do it because their friends are doing it. They will do it because somewhere in the world there are people who need them to do it. They will do it, and they will trust that someone, somewhere, has figured out how to keep them alive. They will trust that the harbors will be there. They will trust that the supplies will come. They will trust that the engineers have done their job. And if the engineers have failed, they will never know why. They will only know that the bullets kept coming and the help never arrived, and the sea turned red around them as they died on a beach in Normandy, waiting for a door that was never built. The old man cannot sleep. This is not unusual. At 69, Winston Churchill has learned to live with insomnia. He sleeps in fits and starts, an hour here, 2 hours there, always with a cigar burning in the ashtray beside his bed and a glass of whiskey within reach. But tonight is different. Tonight, the memories will not stay in their graves. They rise up from the darkness behind his eyelids and demand to be seen. Gallipoli. The name burns in his mind like a brand. April 1915. The beaches of the Dardanelles. Young men in British and Australian and New Zealand uniforms climbing out of landing boats and walking into machine gun fire. Young men falling on the sand with their guts torn open and their eyes staring at a sky they will never see again. Young men dying because Winston Churchill, the First Lord of the Admiralty, had a brilliant idea that turned into a catastrophic failure. He can still hear the screams. He can still smell the blood. He can still see the faces of the mothers who wrote him letters afterward, letters that asked why their sons had to die, letters he could never answer because there was no answer that would bring the boys back. 25 years have passed since Gallipoli. 25 years of carrying this weight. 25 years of waiting for a chance to make it right. And now, in the darkest hour of the greatest war in human history, that chance has come. But to seize it, Churchill must convince the most skeptical men on earth to attempt the impossible. He must convince engineers and admirals and generals that the way to win the war is to build something that has never been built before. He must convince them to build harbors. Artificial harbors. Harbors that will rise from the sea like something out of a science fiction novel. Harbors that will follow the invading army across the Channel and plant themselves on the coast of France and supply the liberation of Europe. He must convince them that the old man with the cigar and the whiskey and the memories is not crazy. He must convince them that the impossible is merely difficult. And he must do it quickly, because the clock is ticking, and the men are dying, and the war will not wait for anyone. The first person Churchill must convince is himself. This is harder than it sounds. Churchill knows better than anyone what happens when brilliant ideas meet the reality of war. He lived it at Gallipoli. He watched his plan crumble because no one had thought about the details. The troops landed, but the supplies did not. The ships waited offshore, but could not unload. The generals on the ground ran out of ammunition and water and hope, while the admirals at sea wrung their hands and blamed each other. Churchill swore then that he would never make that mistake again. He would never launch an invasion without first solving the supply problem. He would never send young men to die on a beach because no one had figured out how to keep them alive after they got there. So when he sits in his study at Chequers in the spring of 1942, staring at the maps of France and the charts of the Channel, he forces himself to think about the details, not the grand strategy, not the sweeping movements of armies, the details, the small things, the things that kill you when you forget them. How many tons of ammunition does a single infantry division fire in a day of heavy combat? How many gallons of fuel does a single tank consume, moving from the beach to the front line? How many trucks does it take to move those tons and gallons from the ships to the men who need them? The numbers pile up on his desk until they threaten to bury him. But buried under the numbers, he finds something else. He finds an idea so strange and so audacious that even he hesitates to speak it aloud. What if the ports are not the answer? What if the answer is to build your own ports? What if you build them in England, in secret, in pieces, and then tow them across the Channel and assemble them on the coast of France? What if you create harbors where no harbors exist? What if you bring the door with you? The idea does not come from nowhere. Churchill has been thinking about artificial harbors for years. He remembers reading about the mulberry harbors that the British Army used in limited experiments during the First World War. He remembers seeing photographs of floating piers that could rise and fall with the tide. He remembers thinking that someday someone would take these small experiments and scale them up into something massive, something that could change the nature of amphibious warfare. He did not know that someday would come so soon. He did not know that he would be the one pushing for it. But here he is, in the spring of 1942, with the war hanging in the balance and the need for a second front growing more urgent every day. The Russians are begging for relief. The Germans are driving deep into the Soviet Union. The Americans have just entered the war and are demanding action. Something must be done. But nothing can be done without a port. And the ports are all fortresses. So Churchill picks up his pen and begins to write. His handwriting is almost illegible, the words tumbling over each other in their hurry to escape his mind. He writes about piers that can rise and fall with the tide. He writes about floating roadways that can carry trucks from ship to shore. He writes about breakwaters made from old ships, sunk in place to calm the waves. He writes about concrete caissons, massive hollow blocks, that can be towed across the channel and then flooded to rest on the seabed. He writes about all of it, the whole impossible dream, in a few hurried pages that will become the most important memo of his wartime career. Then he sends it. He sends it to his chief of combined operations, a man named Louis Mountbatten, who will read it and shake his head and wonder if the Prime Minister has finally lost his mind. Mountbatten is not impressed. He is a practical man, a sailor who has spent his life on the water, who knows what the sea can do to even the strongest structures. He reads Churchill's memo and sees fantasy. He sees the dreams of a man who has never had to build anything more complicated than a garden wall. He sets the memo aside and forgets about it. But Churchill does not forget. A week later, he asks Mountbatten what he thinks. Mountbatten mumbles something about studying it further. Churchill knows what that means. It means nothing. It means the memo is sitting in a drawer, gathering dust, waiting to be forgotten. So Churchill pushes harder. He brings up the subject at meetings. He corners Mountbatten in hallways. He writes more memos. He becomes, in the words of one observer, a man possessed. He cannot let it go because Gallipoli will not let him go. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees those beaches. Every time he opens his mouth, he tastes the ashes of that failure. He will not let it happen again. He will not let the young men of 1944 die the same way the young men of 1915 died. He will build the harbors, if he has to build them, with his own hands. He will drag them across the channel himself. He will do whatever it takes. And slowly, reluctantly, Mountbatten begins to listen. The first real test comes in the summer of 1942. Mountbatten orders a small-scale experiment. He sends a team of engineers to a remote Scottish loch to build a prototype. It is nothing like what Churchill imagines. It is tiny, a few hundred feet of floating roadway and a handful of pontoons. But it is a start. The engineers work in secret, hidden from German reconnaissance aircraft by the surrounding hills. They pour concrete. They weld steel. They assemble the pieces and launch them into the water and watch to see what happens. What happens is not encouraging. The pontoons leak. The roadways flex too much. The whole thing looks like it might fall apart in a moderate breeze. The engineers file their report and send it to London. The report says, in polite, technical language, that the idea is probably impossible. It says that the forces involved are too great, the engineering challenges too complex, the time too short. It says that Churchill should focus on something else, something more realistic, something that might actually work. Churchill reads the report and throws it in the trash. He does not care about the problems. He cares about the solutions. He summons the engineers to London and makes them explain, face to face, why it cannot be done. They explain. They talk about wave forces and tidal ranges and seabed conditions. They talk about the difficulty of towing massive structures across open water. They talk about the vulnerability of the harbors to German attack. They talk for hours, piling problem on top of problem until the weight of impossibility seems overwhelming. Churchill listens. He puffs on his cigar. He sips his whiskey. He nods at the appropriate moments. And when they are finished, he asks one question. What if you made the caissons bigger? The engineers blink. They look at each other. They look back at Churchill. Bigger, they say. Yes, says Churchill. Bigger. If the problem is that the waves will knock over a small caisson, build a caisson so large that the waves cannot knock it over. Build a caisson the size of a building. Build a caisson the size of a ship. Build a caisson so massive that the sea itself will have to respect it. The engineers start to object. They start to explain why bigger is not always better, why the engineering challenges scale with the size, why there are limits to what can be built and towed and sunk. But Churchill cuts them off. He does not want to hear about limits. He wants to hear about possibilities. He wants to know what it would take to build a caisson 6 stories high and 200 feet long. He wants to know how many of them would be needed to create a breakwater 2 miles long. He wants to know if British industry can produce them in the time available. The engineers do not have answers. They have never thought about caissons that big because no one has ever built caissons that big. They go back to their drawing boards, with their heads spinning and their stomachs churning. They go back to try to figure out if the old man is a genius or a madman. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another group of men is grappling with the same problem. The Americans have joined the war, and they have ideas of their own. Their idea is simpler. They will not build artificial harbors. They will capture real ones. They will land at Cherbourg, or Le Havre, or Brest, and take the ports by force. They do not understand why the British are so obsessed with this harbor business. They do not understand what Churchill is so worried about. The American generals are young and confident and eager to fight. They have not lived through Gallipoli. They have not seen what happens when an invasion runs out of supplies. They believe that American courage and American firepower can overcome any obstacle. They look at the British plans for artificial harbors and see a waste of time and resources. They see the fantasies of an old man who is past his prime. They say so, loudly and publicly, in meetings where the British have to sit and listen and smile while their allies insult their prime minister. The tension between the two allies grows as the planning continues. The British push for the Mulberry harbors. The Americans push for a direct assault on a real port. The arguments go on for months, with neither side willing to give ground. And all the while, the clock is ticking toward the invasion date, and the Germans are building their Atlantic wall higher and stronger every day. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected source, a British engineer named Alan Beckett. Beckett is not a famous man. He is not a general or an admiral or a politician. He is simply a man who knows how to build things. He has spent his career designing bridges and roads and buildings, solving practical problems with elegant solutions. When he is assigned to the Mulberry Project, he does what he always does. He starts asking questions. Why do the pontoons leak? Because the seals are not strong enough. Why are the seals not strong enough? Because no one has ever designed seals for this kind of load. Why has no one designed them? Because no one has ever tried to build anything like this before. Beckett listens to the answers and then goes to work. He designs a new kind of hinge that allows the floating roadways to flex with the waves without breaking. He designs a new kind of pontoon that is stronger and more stable than anything that has come before. He designs a new kind of pierhead that can rise and fall with the tide while remaining level enough for trucks to drive onto it. He designs solutions to problems that no one has ever encountered because no one has ever attempted what he is attempting. And slowly, piece by piece, the impossible begins to look possible. The Americans watch Beckett's work with growing interest. They are not convinced yet, but they are curious. They send their own engineers to observe the British experiments. The American engineers are impressed despite themselves. They see the hinges working. They see the pontoons floating. They see the piers rising and falling with the tide. They begin to wonder if maybe there is something to this crazy idea after all. They begin to wonder if maybe the old man with the cigar is not as crazy as he looks. They begin to wonder if maybe the Mulberry Harbors could actually work. The reports go back to Washington. The tone changes. The opposition softens. By the spring of 1943, the Americans have come around. They still want to capture a real port as soon as possible. They still believe that is the best long-term solution. But they accept that in the short term, in the critical first days and weeks after the invasion, the Mulberry Harbors may be the only thing standing between the Allied armies and disaster. They agree to help. They agree to build their own Mulberry Harbor, to be used by American forces on their own beaches. They agree to pour American concrete and cut American steel and weld American joints alongside their British allies. The partnership is uneasy. The trust is fragile. But it is enough. It is enough to move forward. The scale of what they are attempting begins to dawn on everyone involved. The Mulberry Harbors will require more than 2 million tons of concrete and steel. They will require more than 400 massive caissons, each one the size of a 6-story building. They will require 60 miles of floating roadway. They will require 150 pier heads, each one capable of handling the largest ships in the Allied fleet. They will require thousands of smaller components, anchors and buoys and hinges and ramps and fenders and moorings. They will require the labor of more than 20,000 workers, working around the clock in shipyards and construction sites all over Britain. They will require the coordination of hundreds of tugs and barges and support vessels, all moving according to a schedule measured in hours. They will require a level of planning and organization that has never been attempted in the history of human warfare. And they will require all of this to be done in secret, under the noses of the German intelligence services, without a single hint reaching the ears of Hitler or his generals. The workers who build the Mulberry Harbors do not know what they are building. They are told only that they are working on a secret project of vital importance to the war effort. They are not told where the components will go or what they will do when they get there. They are not told why the caissons are shaped the way they are, or why the pontoons have such strange hinges. They are simply told to work. And they do work. They work 18-hour shifts, 7 days a week, until their hands bleed and their backs scream and they cannot remember what it felt like to have a day off. They work through the cold winter of 1943 and the rainy spring of 1944. They work through air raid warnings and bombing attacks, and the constant fear that the Germans might figure out what is happening and send their bombers to destroy the construction sites. They work because they believe that their labor matters. They work because they have brothers and sons and husbands in the armed forces, and they want to bring them home. They work because they have no choice. The war will not wait. The invasion will not wait. The harbors will not build themselves. In the spring of 1944, the first caissons are completed. They sit in the dry docks where they were built, looming over the workers like concrete skyscrapers. They are massive beyond anything that has ever been built for a military purpose. They are 6 stories high and 200 feet long. They weigh more than 6,000 tons each. They are hollow, designed to be flooded and sunk in place once they reach their destination. They look like buildings that have been torn from their foundations and set adrift in a world that has no place for them. The workers stare at them in wonder. They have never seen anything like these things. They have no idea what they are for. They make jokes about them. They call them Churchill's toys. They call them the Prime Minister's folly. They laugh and shake their heads and go back to work. But deep down, they are proud. They are proud of what they have built. They are proud of the size and the scale and the sheer impossibility of it all. They do not know that these concrete monsters will soon cross the channel and sink to the bottom of the sea and become the foundations of a harbor that will save thousands of lives. They do not know that they are building a door in a fortress that has no doors. They only know that they have done their part. They have built something that has never been built before. And when the invasion comes, they will watch the newsreels and read the newspapers and try to find the thing they built in the grainy black and white footage from the beaches of Normandy. They will look for their caissons, their concrete ships, their contribution to the greatest amphibious operation in human history. And some of them will find them. Some of them will see the harbors in the newsreels and point at the screen and say to their wives and children, "I built that. I built that with my own hands. I built that, and I did not know what it was until this very moment." And they will cry. They will cry because they understand now what they were building. They were building a way home for the boys who would not come home any other way. They were building a bridge across the water that would carry the weapons of war to the men who would use them to end the war. They were building victory. They just did not know it until the day they saw it on the screen. Churchill does not visit the construction sites. He is too busy, too old, too important. But he follows the progress closely. He reads the reports. He studies the photographs. He asks questions about every detail. He wants to know how many caissons have been completed and how many are still to come. He wants to know if the hinges are strong enough, and the pontoons are stable enough, and the pier heads will really rise and fall with the tide. He wants to know everything, because he knows that everything matters. He knows that one weak hinge could stop a truck full of ammunition. He knows that one unstable pontoon could dump a tank into the sea. He knows that one mistake could cost thousands of lives. He carries the weight of that knowledge with him every day, just as he carries the weight of Gallipoli. But he also carries something else. He carries hope. He carries the belief that this time will be different. This time, they have thought about the details. This time, they have built the door before they tried to walk through it. This time, the young men on the beaches will have what they need when they need it. This time, the supplies will come. This time, Gallipoli will not happen again. The spring of 1944 turns toward summer. The days grow longer, the weather grows warmer, the invasion fleet gathers in the ports of southern England, the troops load onto the ships and the landing craft. The generals give their final orders. The chaplains give their final blessings. And somewhere in a Scottish loch, the concrete ships wait. They wait for the signal that will send them across the channel. They wait for the moment when they will become not just concrete and steel, but something more. They wait to become the harbors that will save the invasion. They wait to become the door in the fortress. They wait to prove that the old man with the cigar was not crazy after all. They wait to make history. The problem with gasoline is that it burns. This seems obvious. Everyone knows that gasoline burns. But the men who are planning the invasion of Europe are learning that gasoline does not just burn when it is hit by a bullet or a bomb. It burns when you look at it wrong. It burns when the weather is too hot. It burns when the weather is too cold. It burns when the ship carrying it hits a mine. It burns when the tanker truck carrying it crashes on a muddy road. It burns when the storage tank containing it is struck by lightning. It burns when the men handling it are tired and make mistakes. It burns. And when it burns with a fury that nothing can stop. The men who have seen a gasoline fire at sea never forget it. They never forget the way the flames climb the masts and spread across the water and turn the ocean into a lake of fire. They never forget the screams of the men who are trapped in the middle of it. They never forget the smell. And so, when the planners of Operation Overlord begin to calculate how much fuel they will need to keep the armies moving across France, they do not just think about tons and gallons and miles per gallon. They think about fire. They think about the vulnerability of tankers. They think about what will happen when the Germans discover that the entire fuel supply for the invasion is sitting in a few dozen ships anchored off the coast of Normandy. They think about German submarines slipping through the destroyer screen and putting torpedoes into the bellies of those tankers. They think about German bombers coming over at night and dropping flares and then bombs and then watching the fireballs rise into the sky. They think about the invasion stalling, not because of German soldiers or German tanks or German guns, but because there is no gasoline. Because the gasoline is at the bottom of the channel, burning. Because the gasoline never reached the shore at all. The numbers are staggering. A single armored division advancing across France will consume more than 50,000 gallons of fuel every day. 50,000 gallons. That is enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool in less than a week. And there will be not one armored division but dozens. There will be infantry divisions, and artillery units, and supply trucks, and jeeps, and ambulances, and all the other vehicles that make a modern army move. The total fuel requirement for the first 90 days after the invasion is measured not in thousands of gallons or even millions of gallons, but in hundreds of millions of gallons. Hundreds of millions of gallons of gasoline and diesel and aviation fuel. Hundreds of millions of gallons that must be transported across the Atlantic, stored in Britain, loaded onto ships, carried across the channel, unloaded onto the beaches, and then trucked to the front lines. And every step of that journey is vulnerable. Every step is a target. Every step is an opportunity for the Germans to turn the fuel supply into a funeral pyre. The tankers are the biggest problem. Tankers are slow. Tankers are unmaneuverable. Tankers are filled with millions of gallons of highly flammable liquid. They are, in the words of one naval officer, floating bombs waiting for someone to light the fuse. The Germans know this. They have been hunting tankers in the Atlantic since the first day of the war. They have sent thousands of tankers to the bottom. They have turned the sea lanes into graveyards of burning steel. And now the Allies are planning to concentrate dozens of tankers in a small area off the coast of Normandy, within easy range of German aircraft and submarines and E-boats. The admirals look at the plan and shake their heads. It is madness, they say. It is suicide. It cannot be done. But it must be done because the invasion cannot happen without fuel. So the question becomes not whether to bring the fuel, but how to bring it in a way that does not result in a catastrophe. The question becomes whether there is another way. The question becomes Operation Pluto. Pluto stands for Pipeline Under the Ocean. It is not a clever acronym. It is simply a description of what the engineers are proposing to do. They are proposing to lay pipelines across the bottom of the English Channel, from the coast of England to the coast of France, and then pump the fuel directly through those pipelines to the invading armies. No tankers, no vulnerable ships sitting offshore, no floating bombs waiting to be lit, just pipes. Pipes on the bottom of the sea, hidden from German bombers and submarines and E-boats, carrying a continuous stream of fuel from the British mainland to the European continent. It sounds insane. It sounds like something from a science fiction novel. But the engineers who are proposing it are not dreamers. They are practical men who have spent their careers solving impossible problems. They have looked at the numbers and the physics and the logistics, and they have concluded that it might just be possible. They have concluded that the only thing standing between the Allies and a reliable fuel supply is a few 100 miles of pipe and a lot of hard work. The idea does not come from nowhere. The British have been experimenting with underwater pipelines for years. They have laid small pipes across rivers and harbors and estuaries. They have learned how to protect pipes from corrosion and how to keep them from being damaged by anchors and trawlers. They have learned how to pump fuel over long distances and how to deal with the pressure drops and flow rates that come with pipeline transport. They have built a small but useful body of knowledge about the art of moving liquids through pipes underwater. But nothing they have done before compares to what they are proposing now. The English Channel is not a river or a harbor. It is one of the busiest and most dangerous waterways in the world. It has strong currents and violent storms and a seabed that is constantly shifting. It is patrolled by German warships and mined by German mine layers and watched by German reconnaissance aircraft. Laying a pipeline across the channel will require a level of engineering skill and military coordination that has never been attempted. It will require new technologies and new techniques and new ways of thinking about what is possible. It will require the kind of audacity that only comes from desperation. The man who leads the Pluto project is named Arthur Hartley. He is a civilian engineer who works for the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. He knows more about moving oil through pipes than almost anyone in the world. He has spent his career designing pipelines across deserts and mountains and rivers. He understands the physics of flow and the chemistry of corrosion and the metallurgy of pipe manufacture. He is a quiet man, a careful man, a man who does not make claims he cannot support with data. But when he looks at the problem of fueling the invasion, he sees an opportunity. He sees a chance to apply everything he has learned to the greatest engineering challenge of his life. He sees a chance to build something that will change the way wars are fought. He sees a chance to save thousands of lives by keeping the fuel away from the German bombers. And he takes it. The first challenge is the pipe itself. Ordinary steel pipe will not work. It is too heavy. It is too rigid. It cannot be bent around corners or laid in deep water without breaking. It corrodes too quickly in salt water. It is vulnerable to damage from anchors and mines and currents. Hartley needs something different, something new, something that has never been manufactured before. He needs a pipe that is flexible enough to be coiled onto a large drum and then uncoiled onto the seabed. He needs a pipe that is strong enough to withstand the pressure of the water and the force of the currents. He needs a pipe that is resistant to corrosion and damage. He needs a pipe that can carry millions of gallons of fuel without leaking or bursting. He needs, in short, a miracle. And he finds it in an unlikely place. He finds it in the cable industry. The British have been laying underwater telegraph cables for more than a century. They have learned how to make cables that are flexible and strong and resistant to the sea. They have learned how to coil those cables onto huge drums and then lay them across the ocean floor. Hartley looks at the telegraph cables and sees a model for his pipeline. He adapts the cable-making techniques to create a new kind of pipe. It is made of lead, with a steel reinforcement wrapped around it, and a layer of tarred jute on the outside for protection. It is flexible enough to be coiled onto a drum, but strong enough to withstand the pressure of the water. It is resistant to corrosion and damage. It is, in short, exactly what he needs. He calls it HAIS pipe, after the initials of the companies that helped develop it. It is the first of its kind in the world. And it works. But HAIS pipe is not enough. It is too small. It can only carry a limited amount of fuel. To supply the invasion, the Allies will need multiple pipelines, each one capable of pumping millions of gallons per day. They will need a way to manufacture the pipe quickly and in enormous quantities. They will need a way to lay it across the channel without the Germans interfering. They will need a way to connect it to pumping stations on both sides of the water. They will need a way to protect it from damage and repair it when it breaks. The challenges pile up like waves on a stormy sea. But Hartley and his team do not stop. They cannot stop. The invasion is coming. The fuel is needed. The work must go on. The second challenge is the laying mechanism. Ordinary cable ships can lay telegraph cables, but they cannot lay pipeline. The pipe is too heavy. It is too stiff. It requires too much tension to keep it from breaking as it goes into the water. Hartley needs a new kind of ship. He needs a ship that can carry thousands of tons of pipe coiled onto a huge drum. He needs a ship that can pay out that pipe at a controlled rate while maintaining tension to prevent kinking or breaking. He needs a ship that can navigate across the channel with precision, laying the pipe along a predetermined route while avoiding German mines and patrols. He needs, again, a miracle. And again, he finds it in an unexpected place. He finds it in the tankers themselves. 3 old tankers are selected for conversion. They are not glamorous ships. They are not fast or new or beautiful. They are workhorses, built to carry oil across the oceans. But they have one thing that makes them perfect for Hartley's purpose. They have large holds that can be converted into drums. The engineers rip out the interiors of these tankers and install massive cones, like upside-down tops, around which the flexible pipe can be coiled. Each ship can carry more than 70 miles of pipe. Each ship can lay that pipe at a rate of several miles per hour. Each ship becomes a floating pipeline factory, capable of transforming itself from a vessel into a conduit. They are given a new name. They are called conundrums. It is a joke, of course, a play on the word drum. But it is also a recognition of the sheer impossibility of what they are attempting. They are trying to do something that has never been done. They are trying to solve a conundrum that has baffled engineers for generations. And they are doing it with old ships and flexible pipe and the desperate hope that it will all work when the time comes. The tests begin in 1943. The first conundrum sails into the Bristol Channel with 70 miles of pipe coiled in its hold. The crew does not know what they are carrying. They only know that it is secret and important and heavy. The engineers on board watch nervously as the pipe begins to uncoil. It feeds out of the hold and over a specially designed wheel at the stern and down into the water. It sinks to the seabed, unspooling behind the ship like a thread from a spool. The ship moves forward at a steady pace, the pipe following behind, settling into the mud and sand of the channel floor. The engineers hold their breath. They wait for the pipe to kink. They wait for it to break. They wait for something to go wrong. But nothing goes wrong. The pipe lays perfectly. It settles onto the seabed in a smooth, continuous line. The test is a success. The conundrum works. The pipeline can be laid. But laying the pipe is only half the problem. The other half is keeping it there. The seabed of the English Channel is not a smooth, flat surface. It is covered with rocks and wrecks and debris. It is swept by currents that can shift tons of sand in a single tide. It is home to trawlers that drag their nets along the bottom, catching on anything that sticks up. The pipelines must be buried or protected or placed in routes that avoid the worst of the hazards. They must be marked on charts so that anchor-dropping ships do not tear them apart. They must be monitored for leaks and breaks and damage. They must be repaired when something goes wrong. And all of this must be done in secret, without alerting the Germans to what is happening. The engineers study the charts. They talk to fishermen who know the bottom better than anyone. They choose routes that avoid the worst dangers. They design markers that can be placed and retrieved without attracting attention. They prepare repair crews and repair equipment and repair procedures. They do everything they can to ensure that the pipelines will survive the war. The scale of the operation grows as the invasion approaches. The planners realize that one pipeline is not enough. They need multiple pipelines. They need pipelines to carry different types of fuel. They need pipelines that can be laid quickly and replaced easily if they are damaged. They decide to build two separate pipeline systems. One will run from the Isle of Wight to Cherbourg, a distance of more than 70 miles. The other will run from Dungeness to Boulogne, a shorter route that can be used after the ports are captured. Together, these pipelines will be capable of pumping more than 1 million gallons of fuel per day. Together, they will keep the armies moving. Together, they will make the invasion possible. The pipe itself is manufactured in secret factories scattered across Britain. The workers do not know what they are making. They only know that it is some kind of cable, some kind of flexible tube, some kind of thing they have never seen before. They work in shifts, around the clock, turning out miles of pipe every day. The pipe is tested and inspected and coiled onto huge drums. The drums are loaded onto trucks and trains and shipped to the ports where the conundrums are waiting. The operation moves with the precision of a well-oiled machine. But it is not a machine. It is thousands of people working together, each doing their small part to make something that none of them fully understands. It is the kind of effort that only happens in wartime. It is the kind of effort that only happens when the stakes are life and death. The Germans do not know about Pluto. They do not know that the Allies are planning to pump fuel under the channel. They do not know about the flexible pipe, or the conundrums, or the pumping stations on the English coast. They do not know because the secret is kept better than almost any other secret of the war. The workers are sworn to silence. The engineers are forbidden to discuss their work. The ships are disguised, and their movements are concealed. The whole operation exists in a bubble of secrecy, hidden from the enemy by the determination of thousands of people who understand that one slip could cost thousands of lives. The Germans suspect something. They always suspect something. But they do not know what. They do not know that under the waters of the Channel, a network of pipes is waiting to carry the lifeblood of the Allied armies to the shores of France. They do not know that the fuel will flow, not through vulnerable tankers, but through hidden conduits on the seabed. They do not know that Operation Pluto is about to change the rules of war. As the spring of 1944 turns toward summer, the final preparations are made. The pumping stations on the English coast are completed and tested. The pipelines are coiled onto the conundrums and ready to be laid. The receiving stations on the French coast are designed and built, waiting to be installed as soon as the beaches are secure. The engineers run calculations and simulations and drills. They practice every step of the operation until they can do it in their sleep. They know that when the time comes, there will be no second chances. The pipelines must work the first time. The fuel must flow. The invasion must succeed. On the evening of June 5, 1944, as the invasion fleet steams toward Normandy, the conundrums are waiting. They are anchored off the English coast, their holds filled with miles of flexible pipe. Their crews are nervous. They know that tomorrow everything changes. They know that tomorrow the guns will start firing and the men will start dying and the pipelines will start pumping. They know that the success of the invasion depends in part on what they do. They do not sleep well that night. They lie in their bunks and stare at the ceilings and listen to the engines thrumming and wonder what the morning will bring. They wonder if the pipelines will work. They wonder if the Germans will find them. They wonder if they will survive. They wonder, as all soldiers wonder on the night before battle, whether they will see the sun set again. And then the sun rises. And the invasion begins. And the conundrums get underway. And the pipelines start to unspool. And the fuel starts to flow. And Operation Pluto becomes not a plan or a dream or a hope, but a reality. A reality that will keep the armies moving across France. A reality that will save thousands of lives. A reality that will prove that the engineers were right. That the impossible was merely difficult. That the door in the fortress could be built not only of concrete and steel, but also of lead and steel and tarred jute, stretching across the bottom of the sea like a lifeline from England to Europe. A lifeline that would not burn. A lifeline that would not sink. A lifeline that would carry the fuel of freedom to the men who needed it most. The woman's name is Margaret, but no one calls her that. To the men she works with, she is Maggie, the welder from Glasgow, who can lay a bead straighter than any man on the site. She is 23 years old. She has been welding since she was 16, learning from her father, who learned from his father before him. When the war started, she tried to join the Women's Royal Naval Service. They told her they did not need welders. They told her they needed clerks and drivers and cooks. She told them they were wrong. She told them that ships get damaged and ships need repair, and ships cannot be repaired without welders. They did not listen. So she found her own way. She heard about a secret construction project in the Scottish Highlands. She heard they were looking for welders, any welders, men or women, it did not matter. She applied. She was hired. She was told she would be working on something important, something secret, something that could change the course of the war. She was told she could never tell anyone what she saw. She was told that if she talked, she would be arrested, imprisoned, maybe worse. She agreed. She had no choice. The war needed her. And so, she found herself in a remote shipyard on the west coast of Scotland, staring at the largest concrete structure she had ever seen. A structure that made no sense at all. It was too big for a ship. It was too boxy for a boat. It had no engines, no rudder, no place for a crew. It looked like a building, but a building had no business being built in a dry dock. She asked her foreman what it was. He told her to shut up and weld. She shut up and welded. She has been welding ever since, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, until her hands cramp and her eyes burn, and she cannot remember what it felt like to see the sun. She does not know what she is building. She does not know that she is building a door in a fortress that has no doors. She only knows that the work is hard, and the pay is good, and somewhere across the channel, there are boys who need what she is building, even if she does not know what it is. The shipyard where Maggie works is one of dozens scattered across Britain. From the south coast of England to the remote lochs of Scotland, the Mulberry harbors are taking shape in secret. The scale of the operation is staggering. More than 20,000 workers are employed in the construction. 20,000 men and women who have been told only that they are working on a secret project of vital importance to the war effort. They are welders and riveters and carpenters and electricians and crane operators and truck drivers and cooks and cleaners. They work in shifts that never end, through nights so cold that the metal freezes to their skin and days so long that they forget what sleep feels like. They work through air raid warnings and bombing attacks, and the constant fear that the Germans might figure out what is happening and send their bombers to destroy everything. They work because they have no choice. The war will not wait. The invasion will not wait. The harbors will not build themselves. The concrete caissons are the biggest challenge. Each one is the size of a 6-story building. Each one weighs more than 6,000 tons. Each one requires thousands of tons of concrete and steel, poured and shaped and cured according to specifications that have never been attempted before. The engineers have designed the caissons to be hollow, with internal compartments that can be flooded to sink them into place. They have designed them to be towed across the channel, which means they must be strong enough to withstand the forces of the sea but light enough to float. They have designed them to be sunk in precise locations, which means they must have valves and pipes and controls that allow water to be let in and pumped out. They have designed them to last for months, maybe years, which means they must be resistant to corrosion and damage and the constant pounding of the waves. They have designed miracles. Now the workers must build them. The construction sites are chaos, organized into something that looks like order. Cranes swing massive loads through the air. Trucks rumble back and forth, carrying sand and gravel and cement. Welding torches flare in the darkness, casting strange shadows on the concrete walls. Men shout and swear and wave their arms. Women work alongside them, their faces hidden behind welding masks, their hands steady on the tools. The noise is constant, a roar of machinery and human effort that never stops, day or night. The workers do not talk much. They are too tired to talk. They eat their meals standing up, sandwiches stuffed into their mouths between shifts. They sleep in bunkhouses that smell of sweat and cigarette smoke and the damp wool of uniforms that never quite dry. They write letters home when they have time, letters that say nothing about what they are doing, letters that are censored anyway, letters that arrive weeks late and leave their families wondering what kind of work keeps their loved ones so busy for so long. Maggie works on the reinforcing steel. The concrete alone is not strong enough. It needs a skeleton, a framework of steel bars that gives it strength and flexibility. Maggie welds those bars together, creating grids that will be buried inside the concrete forever. She works high up on the caisson, standing on scaffolding that sways in the wind. Below her, the dry dock is a maze of activity. Above her, the sky is gray and endless. She does not look down. She does not look up. She looks at the steel in front of her, and she welds. She welds bead after bead, joint after joint, hour after hour. She thinks about her father, who taught her to weld. She thinks about her brothers, one in the army, one in the navy, both somewhere she cannot reach. She thinks about the boys across the channel, the ones who will need what she is building. She does not know what it is, but she knows they will need it. She knows because the war needs everything. It needs bullets and bombs and tanks and planes. It needs ships and guns and uniforms and boots. It needs concrete boxes the size of buildings, even if no one will tell her why. She welds and she thinks, and she keeps working, because stopping is not an option. Stopping means letting the boys down. Stopping means letting the war go on longer. Stopping means her brothers might not come home. She cannot stop. None of them can stop. The Americans are building their own Mulberry Harbor on the other side of the Atlantic. They do not trust the British designs entirely. They have their own ideas about how things should be done. The American caissons are different from the British ones. They are simpler, more straightforward, less elegant. The American engineers believe in brute force. They believe that if you make something big enough and strong enough, it will work. They pour concrete and cut steel with the same confidence that they bring to everything else. They work fast. They work hard. They do not ask questions. They just build. The British watch the American construction with a mixture of admiration and concern. They admire the speed and energy. They worry about the lack of attention to detail. They wonder if the American caissons will survive the crossing. They wonder if they will survive the storm. But they do not say anything. The alliance is too important. The invasion is too close. They keep their mouths shut and their eyes open, and they hope that everything will work out in the end. The secrecy is a burden on everyone. The workers cannot tell their families where they are or what they are doing. They cannot write letters home, describing the strange structures taking shape around them. They cannot share their fears or their hopes or their exhaustion with anyone outside the construction sites. They live in a bubble, isolated from the world, surrounded by people who know as little as they do. The isolation takes a toll. Marriages strain, relationships break. Men and women who have not seen their families in months begin to forget what their children look like. They look at photographs by lamplight and try to remember the sound of their wives' voices. They write letters full of vague assurances that everything is fine, that they are fine, that they will be home soon. They do not believe the letters. They know they will not be home soon. They know the war is not over. They know the work is just beginning. But they write anyway because writing is all they can do. The engineers who designed the Mulberry Harbors visit the construction sites regularly. They walk among the caissons with clipboards and measuring tapes, checking dimensions and inspecting welds and making notes. They talk to the foremen and the supervisors. They rarely talk to the workers. The workers are beneath their notice, cogs in a machine too large to comprehend. But sometimes an engineer stops and watches a welder work. He watches the steady hand, the precise movement, the concentration on the face behind the mask. He wonders who this person is. He wonders what they think about as they work. He wonders if they know what they are building. He wants to tell them. He wants to say, "You are building a harbor. You are building something that will save thousands of lives. You are building the door that will let us walk into Europe and end this war." But he does not say anything. The secrecy is too important. The Germans might be listening. The workers might talk. The whole operation might be compromised. He keeps his mouth shut and walks away, leaving the welder to wonder and work and wait. The caissons grow slowly. Each one takes weeks to complete. The concrete is poured in sections, layer by layer, allowing time for curing between pours. The reinforcing steel is welded into place, creating a skeleton that will hold the concrete together when the waves start pounding. The internal compartments are built, each one with its own flooding valve and access hatch. The toe points are installed, massive steel rings that will be used to pull the caissons across the channel. The whole structure is inspected and re-inspected, checked and double-checked, because a single mistake could mean disaster. A single weak weld could let the sea in. A single crack could spread and grow and destroy the whole caisson. A single error could cost thousands of lives. The workers know this without being told. They feel it in their bones. They check their own work obsessively, running their hands over the welds, looking for flaws, fixing anything that looks wrong. They do not want to be the ones who let the boys down. They do not want to be the ones who caused the failure. They work with a care that borders on obsession, pouring their fear and their hope into every joint, every pore, every inch of steel and concrete. The winter of 1943 is brutal. The cold seeps into everything. The concrete freezes before it can cure. The workers' hands go numb inside their gloves. The wind off the Atlantic cuts through layers of clothing like a knife. The construction sites become battles against the elements as much as battles against time. The engineers bring in heaters and tarps and temporary shelters. They adjust the concrete mix to cure faster. They add chemicals to lower the freezing point. They do whatever it takes to keep the work going. The workers endure. They have no choice. They bundle up and keep working, their breath freezing on their scarves. their eyelashes frosting over. They curse the cold and the war and the Germans and the engineers who designed these impossible things. But they keep working. They always keep working. Maggie's hands are a mess. The cold has cracked her skin. The burns from the welding torch have left scars. She wraps her hands in bandages at night and soaks them in warm water when she can. But when she picks up the torch, she forgets the pain. She focuses on the work. She focuses on the steel. She focuses on doing the job right. She thinks about her brothers. One of them is on a destroyer in the North Atlantic, hunting U-boats in waters so cold that a man who falls overboard dies in minutes. The other is in North Africa, fighting Rommel's Afrika Korps in the desert. She has not seen either of them in 2 years. She does not know if she will ever see them again. She welds, and she thinks, and she hopes that somewhere, someone is building something that will keep them safe. She hopes that the work she is doing matters. She hopes that when the invasion comes, her brothers will not be on those beaches. But she knows they might be. She knows that every soldier is someone's brother, someone's son, someone's husband. She knows that the boys on the beaches will be just like her brothers. And she knows that what she is building will help keep them alive. She does not know how. She does not know why. But she knows it will. She has to believe it. It is the only thing that keeps her going. The spring of 1944 brings warmer weather and longer days. The caissons are almost complete. They sit in the dry docks like sleeping giants, waiting to be awakened. The workers walk among them, staring up at the sheer walls, marveling at what they have built. They have built something that has never existed before. They have built something that will cross the sea and sink to the bottom and become a harbor. They have built something that will save lives. They do not know the details, but they know enough. They know that what they have done matters. They know that they have done their part. They are proud. They are exhausted. They are ready to go home. But the war is not over. The invasion is still coming. The work is not done. There are more caissons to build, more steel to weld, more concrete to pour. The workers go back to their tasks. They go back to the scaffolding and the welding torches and the endless shifts. They go back because they have no choice. The war will not wait. The harbors will not build themselves. The boys on the beaches are waiting. And somewhere in a Scottish shipyard, Maggie the welder picks up her torch and goes back to work. The sea is not empty. This is the first thing the men on the tugs notice as they gather off the English coast on the afternoon of June 5th, 1944. The sea is full. It is full of ships. Thousands of ships. Landing craft and destroyers and troop transports and supply vessels and hospital ships and minesweepers and everything else that floats and moves and carries men to war. They stretch to the horizon in every direction, a city on the water, a fleet so vast that it seems impossible that the world could contain so many vessels. The men on the tugs have never seen anything like it. They have spent months training for this moment, months learning how to tow the massive caissons across the channel, months preparing for a mission that most of them still do not fully understand. Now the moment is here. Now the caissons are behind them, massive concrete shapes looming out of the water like the ghosts of buildings drowned in some ancient flood. Now they are part of the greatest armada in human history. Now they are going to war. The caissons are called phoenixes. It is a fitting name. Like the mythical bird, they will rise from the ashes of the old world to create something new. Like the mythical bird, they will be born in fire and transformed by water. Like the mythical bird, they will become symbols of rebirth and renewal. But the men who tow them do not think about mythology. They think about the weather. They think about the Germans. They think about the weight behind them, the 6,000 tons of concrete and steel that are straining at the tow lines, threatening to drag them backward or sideways or into the path of another ship. They think about the fact that they are moving at less than 5 knots, slower than a man can walk, while around them the rest of the fleet surges toward France at twice that speed. They think about the fact that they are sitting ducks. They think about the fact that the Germans have submarines and E-boats and aircraft that would love nothing more than to blow a hole in a concrete caisson and watch it sink to the bottom, taking months of work and thousands of tons of material with it. They think about these things, and they try not to think about them because thinking does no good. The only thing that matters is the tow. The only thing that matters is keeping the line tight and the course true and the Phoenix following behind like a faithful dog on a leash. There are more than 400 Phoenixes, 400 concrete giants, each one the size of a building, each one weighing more than a destroyer, each one destined for a specific spot on the bottom of the English Channel off the coast of Normandy. They are spread out along the English coast, hidden in estuaries and locks and harbors where German reconnaissance aircraft cannot find them. Now they are emerging from their hiding places, one by one, gathering into convoys that will cross the channel together. The tugs that tow them are a motley collection. Some are powerful ocean-going tugs built for exactly this kind of work. Others are harbor tugs, designed for moving ships in calm waters, pressed into service for a mission far beyond their original purpose. Still others are fishing boats and trawlers and anything else that can pull a heavy load and steer a straight course. The men who crew them are fishermen and dock workers and merchant sailors and volunteers who have never towed anything larger than a lifeboat. They have trained for weeks, learning how to handle the massive loads, how to communicate with each other, how to react when something goes wrong. But training is not the same as reality. Reality is the dark water and the crowded sea and the enemy waiting somewhere ahead. Reality is the knowledge that if they fail, the invasion fails with them. The tow lines are the weak point. They are thick steel cables, capable of holding enormous weight, but they are also vulnerable. If a line snaps, the Phoenix goes free. It drifts with the currents, out of control, a 6,000-ton missile heading wherever the sea takes it. It could collide with another ship. It could run aground on a sandbar. It could drift into a minefield. It could simply wander off and be lost forever. The men on the tugs watch their tow lines constantly, looking for signs of wear, listening for the twang of breaking strands. They carry spare lines, but replacing a broken tow in the middle of the channel is a nightmare. It requires skill and luck and the kind of coordination that is hard enough in daylight and almost impossible at night, and most of the crossing will be at night. The invasion fleet is moving under cover of darkness, trying to avoid German aircraft. The tugs and their Phoenixes must do the same. They must navigate through the dark, surrounded by thousands of other ships, towing loads that they cannot see and can only feel through the tension on the lines. The first few hours are the worst. The convoy forms up off the Isle of Wight, a massive gathering of ships and caissons and tugs that stretches for miles. The men on the tugs can see the lights of the other vessels, dimmed and hooded to avoid detection, but still visible in the darkness. They can hear the rumble of engines and the creak of hulls and the occasional shout of a crewman somewhere in the night. They can feel the pull of their own tow, the constant strain of the Phoenix following behind. They adjust their speed and course constantly, trying to maintain position in the formation, trying to avoid collisions, trying to keep the tow line at the right angle and tension. It is exhausting work. It is nerve-wracking work. It is work that requires every ounce of skill and concentration they possess. And it is only the beginning. The crossing takes about 15 hours. 15 hours of slow, steady progress across one of the busiest waterways in the world. 15 hours of watching and waiting and hoping that the Germans do not show up. 15 hours of listening to the radio for news of the invasion, for reports of paratroopers dropping behind enemy lines, for word that the first waves are hitting the beaches. The men on the tugs hear snatches of information, fragments of a story that is unfolding somewhere ahead of them. They hear that the paratroopers have landed, that some are scattered, that others are fighting for their lives. They hear that the beaches are being bombed, that the naval bombardment has begun, that the landing craft are heading for the shore. They hear that men are dying. They hear that the invasion is underway, and they keep towing. They keep moving at 5 knots toward a coast they have never seen, pulling their concrete giants behind them, knowing that everything depends on their arrival. They keep towing because stopping is not an option. They keep towing because the men on the beaches need what they are bringing. They keep towing because that is their job. The German reaction is not what the Allies feared. The Luftwaffe is almost absent from the skies over the Channel. The few aircraft that appear are driven off by the massive fighter cover that the Allies have provided. The E-boats, the German fast attack craft based in Cherbourg and Le Havre, try to interfere but are met by destroyers and motor gunboats that chase them away. The submarines, the U-boats that have terrorized the Atlantic for years, are conspicuous by their absence. The Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, has been so weakened by years of war that it can do little more than harass the edges of the invasion fleet. The men on the tugs see flashes of light on the horizon, hear the rumble of distant explosions, but nothing comes close to them. The Phoenixes plod on, unmolested, through the night and into the dawn. By first light on June 6th, they are halfway across the Channel. By noon, they can see the coast of France. By evening, they are approaching the assembly areas off the beaches, where they will be sunk into place. They have made it. The first part of the mission is complete, but the mission is far from over. Sinking the Phoenixes is as difficult as towing them. Each one must be positioned precisely within feet of its designated spot. The breakwaters they will form must be straight and continuous, with no gaps that waves can exploit. The water depth must be exactly right, shallow enough that the Phoenixes rest on the bottom, but deep enough that ships can approach them. The seabed must be level, or the Phoenixes will tilt and become unstable. The engineers have surveyed the coast, chosen the sites, marked the positions with buoys. Now the tugs must deliver their loads to those exact spots, in the right order, at the right time, and they must do it while under fire. The Germans have not given up. They may have failed to stop the invasion at sea, but they are determined to stop it on the shore. The beaches are under artillery fire. The guns inland are firing constantly, shells falling among the landing craft and the supply ships and the men on the sand. The tugs and their phoenixes are not immune. They are big, slow, obvious targets. The German gunners can see them. They can range on them. They can hit them. The men on the tugs hear the shells coming, the whistle that turns into a scream, that turns into an explosion. They see the geysers of water rising around them. They feel the shock waves through their hulls. They know that at any moment, a shell could hit the Phoenix behind them, cracking the concrete, flooding the compartments, sending months of work to the bottom in the wrong place. They know that a shell could hit the tug itself, killing them all, leaving the Phoenix to drift and die. They know these things, and they keep working. They keep positioning the tows. They keep communicating with the engineers on the beach. They keep doing their jobs because stopping means failure, and failure is not an option. The first Phoenixes are sunk on June 7th, the day after the initial landings. The tugs maneuver them into position, aligning them with the buoys, checking the depth, adjusting the angle. Then the order is given. Open the valves. The crewmen on the Phoenixes, the brave souls who have ridden these concrete monsters across the channel, begin opening the flooding valves. Water rushes into the internal compartments. The Phoenix settles slowly, evenly, sinking toward the seabed. The tugs keep tension on the lines, guiding the descent, making sure the Phoenix does not tip or slide. The water rises around it. The concrete walls disappear beneath the surface. The top of the Phoenix, the part that will remain above water, becomes lower and lower until only a few feet are visible. Then it stops. The Phoenix has reached the bottom. It rests on the seabed, solid and immovable, the first piece of the Mulberry Harbor. The tugs cast off the lines and move to the next position. The work continues. The sinking continues for days. Phoenix after Phoenix arrives from England, is positioned by the tugs, and is sunk into place. The breakwaters grow section by section, mile by mile. They stretch out from the beaches, creating sheltered water, where ships can anchor and unload. Behind them, the floating piers are being assembled. The pontoons are towed into place and connected. The roadways are laid across them. The pier heads are installed at the ends. The harbor takes shape, a city on the water, rising from nothing in the space of days. The men who built it, the engineers and the tug crews and the dock workers and the soldiers, watch with something like wonder. They have done what no one has ever done before. They have built a harbor where no harbor existed. They have created a door in a fortress that had no doors. They have made the impossible possible. But the work is not done. The harbor must be supplied. The ships must come and go. The fuel must flow. The ammunition must be unloaded. The food and water and medicine and spare parts and everything else that an army needs must move from the ships to the shore, to the front lines. The Mulberry Harbor is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. It is the machine that will feed the war. And like any machine, it must be maintained. It must be protected. It must be kept running no matter what. The men who built it become the men who run it. They work around the clock, in all weather, under constant threat of German attack. They unload ships and repair damage and fight fires and dodge bombs. They do not sleep. They do not rest. They do not stop. They cannot stop. The invasion depends on them. The war depends on them. The boys on the front lines depend on them. They keep working. Maggie the welder is not on the beaches. She is still in Scotland, still welding, still building more phoenixes. The demand for caissons is endless. The harbor needs more protection. The breakwaters need to be extended. The engineers have calculated that they need more than 400 phoenixes to complete the harbors. They have built 400. They need more. The work continues. Maggie does not know that the first phoenixes have been sunk. She does not know that the harbor is taking shape. She only knows that the welds must be perfect, and the shifts must be endured, and the war must be won. She picks up her torch and goes back to work. Somewhere across the channel, the boys on the beaches are waiting for what she is building. She cannot let them down. She will not let them down. She keeps welding. The tugs return to England to get more phoenixes. They cross the channel again and again, towing their concrete giants through waters that are still dangerous, still patrolled by German submarines and aircraft. They make the trip dozens of times, each time the same slow crawl, each time the same tension, each time the same relief when they reach the French coast and hand off their loads to the sinking crews. They become experts at the work. They learn the currents and the tides and the safest routes. They learn to read the weather and anticipate the waves. They learn to trust each other and their equipment and their own skills. They become a team, a community, a brotherhood of men who have done something that no one else has ever done. They are proud of what they have accomplished. But they are also tired. So tired. The work never stops. The convoys never end. The war goes on. By the middle of June, the Mulberry harbors are operational. Ships are unloading at the piers. Trucks are driving from the ships to the shore. Supplies are flowing to the front lines. The invasion that could have stalled on the beaches is now moving inland. The German counterattacks are being beaten back. The Allies are advancing. The door is open. And behind it all, behind the soldiers and the sailors and the airmen, behind the generals and the politicians and the planners, behind the glory and the sacrifice and the heroism, there are the engineers. There are the workers. There are the tug crews and the welders and the concrete pourers. There are the people who built the door. They are not on the beaches. They are not in the history books. Their names are forgotten, their faces unknown. But without them, the invasion would have failed. Without them, the door would have remained closed. Without them, the boys on the beaches would have died, waiting for help that never came. They are the invisible army. They are the unsung heroes. They are the ones who made the miracle happen. And they keep working. They always keep working. Because the war is not over. And the harbors must hold. The beach is not a beach anymore. It is a construction site, a battlefield, a graveyard, a miracle. The sand that was supposed to be soft and yielding is packed hard by thousands of boots and truck tires and tank tracks. The water that was supposed to be blue is gray and brown and sometimes red. The air that was supposed to be fresh is thick with smoke and dust, and the smell of explosives, and the other smell, the one that no one talks about, the smell of men who did not make it off the sand. The engineers who wade ashore on the afternoon of June 6th do not have time to think about smells. They do not have time to think about the bodies floating in the surf, or the wreckage burning on the beach, or the bullets that are still coming from somewhere inland. They have time to think about one thing only: the harbor. The harbor must be built. The harbor must be built now. The harbor must be built under fire, and they are the ones who have to build it. Their name is Legion. They are British and American and Canadian engineers, men who volunteered for this duty, knowing that they would be among the first ashore, knowing that they would be targets, knowing that many of them would not survive. They are specialists in concrete and steel, in demolition and construction, in the strange art of building things while other people are trying to kill you. They have trained for this moment for months. They have practiced on the beaches of England, assembling mock-ups of the Mulberry components, learning the sequence of operations, memorizing the positions where each piece must go. They have studied aerial photographs and intelligence reports and tide tables. They know this beach better than they know their own hometowns. But knowing is not the same as being. Being is the chaos. Being is the noise. Being is the man next to you, suddenly falling with a hole in his head where his face used to be. Being is the realization that the training did not prepare you for this, because nothing could prepare you for this. Being is the moment when you have to decide whether to keep moving forward or to stop and die. They keep moving forward. The first task is to clear the beach. The Germans have spent months planting obstacles in the sand and the surf. There are metal stakes angled toward the sea, designed to rip open the bottoms of landing craft. There are concrete pyramids, too heavy to move, placed to block the path of tanks and trucks. There are mines, thousands of mines, buried just beneath the surface, waiting for a foot or a tire to trigger them. There is barbed wire, coils and coils of it, tangled and treacherous. The engineers must clear all of this before the harbor construction can begin. They must do it while the Germans are still shooting at them. They must do it quickly, because every hour of delay means another hour when the supplies cannot flow. They move forward with mine detectors and wire cutters and demolition charges. They work in teams, covering each other, watching for snipers, listening for the whistle of incoming shells. They clear a path. They clear a lane. They clear a space where the harbor can rise. The first components of the Mulberry arrive on June 7th. They are not the Phoenixes. The Phoenixes are still coming, still being towed across the channel. The first components are the pierheads, the floating docks where the ships will unload. They are massive steel structures designed to rise and fall with the tide while remaining level enough for trucks to drive onto them. They have been towed across the channel on barges, and now they must be maneuvered into position off the beach. The engineers wade into the water to guide them. They are up to their chests in the cold channel, holding onto ropes and pushing against steel, trying to align the pierheads with the markers that were placed during the survey. The water is rough. The current is strong. The pierheads are heavy and uncooperative. The engineers struggle and swear and keep working. Slowly, inch by inch, the pierheads move into position. Anchors are dropped. Lines are secured. The first piece of the harbor is in place. The floating roadways come next. They are long sections of steel decking mounted on pontoons designed to connect the pierheads to the shore. They are flexible, able to rise and fall with the waves, able to bend and twist without breaking. They are towed into position and connected to the pierheads and to each other, forming a continuous road from the deep water to the beach. The engineers work from small boats and from the roadways themselves, bolting the sections together, checking the connections, making adjustments. They work through the day and into the night, under flares and star shells, and the occasional burst of German machine gun fire. They work until their hands are raw and their eyes are burning, and they cannot remember when they last slept. But they keep working. The roadways must be complete. The trucks must be able to drive. The supplies must flow. The Phoenixes begin to arrive on June 8th. The tugs bring them in, one by one, maneuvering them into position along the line of the breakwater. The engineers on the beach guide them with signals, using flags and lights and radios. The crews on the Phoenixes open the flooding valves, and the concrete giants settle slowly toward the seabed. The engineers watch anxiously, checking the alignment, making sure each Phoenix lands exactly where it should. If one is out of position, the whole breakwater will be compromised. If one tips or slides, it could take days to correct. The Phoenixes sink into place with a final settling of water and mud. They are massive, immovable, permanent. They are the bones of the harbor, the skeleton around which everything else will be built. But the Germans are not cooperating. They see what is happening. They understand finally what the Allies are building. They realize that these strange concrete structures are not random wreckage or failed landing craft. They are a harbor, an artificial harbor, a door in their fortress, and they are determined to stop it. The artillery inland redoubles its efforts. Shells fall on the beach, on the water, on the construction sites. German aircraft appear at night, dropping bombs and flares, trying to hit the Phoenixes and the pier heads and the floating roadways. The engineers work under fire constantly. They learn to tell the difference between incoming and outgoing. They learn to hit the ground when they hear the whistle. They learn to get up again when the explosion is over. They learn to keep working because stopping means death and continuing means life. And there is no other choice. The American mulberry at Omaha Beach is having a harder time than the British one at Gold Beach. Omaha was the toughest landing. The cliffs, the bunkers, the murderous crossfire that turned the sand into a slaughterhouse. The Americans who survived that first day are still fighting to secure the beachhead. The engineers trying to build the harbor are working under conditions that are almost impossible. The Germans on the cliffs above can see everything. They can direct their artillery onto any target they choose. They can watch the Phoenixes being sunk and the roadways being laid and the pier heads being positioned. And they can shoot at all of it. The American engineers take casualties. Men fall and do not get up. But the work continues. The harbor must be built. The supplies must flow. The invasion must succeed. The British harbor at Gold Beach is more sheltered. The cliffs are lower. The German positions are less commanding. The engineers work faster, more efficiently, with fewer interruptions. The Phoenixes sink into place in perfect alignment. The roadways stretch from the shore to the pier heads. The first ships begin to unload on June 10th, 4 days after the initial landing. Trucks drive off the pier heads and onto the beach, and up to the supply dumps that are being established inland. The supplies flow. The ammunition reaches the front lines. The fuel reaches the tanks. The food reaches the men. The invasion that could have stalled is now accelerating. The door is open. The Allies are coming through. But the work is not done. The harbor must be expanded. More Phoenixes are needed. More roadways. More pier heads. The engineers work around the clock, sleeping in shifts, eating cold rations, drinking water that tastes of chlorine and salt. They are exhausted beyond anything they have ever experienced. They are hollow-eyed and shaky-handed, and running on fumes. But they keep working. They keep working because the alternative is failure. They keep working because the men at the front need what they are building. They keep working because they have come too far to stop now. The American mulberry struggles on. The engineers there are heroes. They work under fire that would break anyone else. They lose men every day. They repair damage every night. They keep the harbor functioning despite everything the Germans can throw at them. But the Germans are throwing a lot. The artillery on the cliffs is relentless. The bombers come almost every night. The harbor is hit again and again. The engineers patch and repair and rebuild. They are fighting a battle of attrition against the German guns, and they are losing. The harbor is slowly being destroyed faster than they can fix it. They need a miracle. They need something to change. They need help. The help comes from an unexpected source. The British harbor at Gold Beach is working so well that it can spare resources. Tugs and barges and equipment are sent to Omaha to help the Americans. Engineers from the British harbor cross over to advise their American counterparts. The two mulberries, originally designed as separate projects, begin to work together. The Americans learn from the British. The British learn from the Americans. The harbors become a joint effort, a symbol of the alliance that is fighting this war. And slowly, the American harbor stabilizes. The damage is repaired. The fires are put out. The supplies begin to flow. Omaha Beach, the most dangerous place in the world on June 6th, becomes a functioning port by June 15th. The door is open there too. The engineers who built these harbors do not have time to celebrate. They do not have time to feel proud. They are too busy working. The supplies keep coming. The ships keep arriving. The trucks keep driving. The harbor must keep functioning. Every day, more men and more equipment and more supplies pour through the mulberries. Every day, the front line moves further inland. Every day, the Germans are pushed back. The harbors are working exactly as planned. The miracle is real. But the engineers are paying a price. They are exhausted. They are traumatized. They have seen things that no one should see. They have lost friends and comrades and brothers. They have worked until their bodies gave out and then kept working anyway. They are not the same men who waded ashore on June 6th. They are older, harder, more hollow. They carry something inside them that will never go away. They carry the memory of what they did and what they saw and what they lost. They carry the knowledge that they built something that saved thousands of lives. They carry the weight of that knowledge forever. Maggie the welder is still in Scotland. She hears about the mulberries in the newsreels. She sees the grainy black and white footage of the phoenixes being sunk and the roadways being laid and the trucks driving off the pierheads. She sees the things she built. She sees her welds, her steel, her concrete. She sees the harbor that she helped create. She cries. She does not know why she cries. Maybe because she is tired. Maybe because she is proud. Maybe because she finally understands what she was building all those months. Maybe because her brothers are over there somewhere, and she hopes they are using her harbor, driving on her roadways, unloading from her pierheads. She cries, and then she wipes her eyes and picks up her torch. There are more phoenixes to build. The war is not over. The work continues. On the beaches of Normandy, the engineers keep working. They do not know about Maggie. They do not know about the thousands of workers in Britain who built the components they are assembling. They only know that the harbor is working and the supplies are flowing and the invasion is succeeding. They only know that they have done their job. They only know that they are part of something historic, something that will be remembered forever. They do not think about forever. They think about the next ship, the next load, the next truck. They think about getting through the day. They think about surviving. They think about going home. But home is far away. Home is a dream. Home is something that will have to wait, because the harbor needs them. The invasion needs them. The war needs them. They keep working. The wind starts on the morning of June 19th. It is not a strong wind at first. It is just a breeze, a little more than usual, the kind of wind that makes the flags stand out and the water chop into small waves. The men on the Mulberry Harbors barely notice it. They have been working for nearly 2 weeks, unloading ships, repairing damage, expanding the facilities. They are tired. They are very tired. A little wind does not matter. A little wind is nothing compared to German artillery and German bombs and German machine guns. A little wind is just weather. They keep working. But the wind does not stop. It grows. By midday, it is blowing at 20 knots. The waves are higher now, slapping against the phoenixes, splashing over the floating roadways. The men on the pier heads feel the movement, the constant rise and fall that they have grown used to, but that is now more pronounced, more violent. They look at the sky. It is gray. It is getting grayer. The clouds are low and fast-moving, scudding across the horizon like frightened animals. The men do not like what they see. They have been told about the weather. They have been told that the English Channel is unpredictable, that storms can come up without warning, that the Mulberry Harbors are designed to withstand normal conditions, but no one knows what they will do in a real storm. They are about to find out. By evening, the wind is blowing at 30 knots. The waves are 6 feet high, then 8, then 10. They crash against the phoenixes with a force that shakes the concrete giants to their foundations. The floating roadways rise and fall and twist and groan. The hinges that connect them, the brilliant hinges designed by Alan Beckett, are working as intended, flexing with the waves, absorbing the motion. But they are working under loads they were never designed to handle. The men watch and wait and hope. They hope the hinges hold. They hope the phoenixes stay in place. They hope the harbor survives. They are not sure it will. Night falls. The storm does not. It gets worse. The wind howls through the rigging of the ships anchored behind the breakwaters. The waves crash against the hulls, making them roll and pitch and yaw. The men on those ships are sick. They are afraid. They are wondering if they will see the morning. The engineers on the harbors cannot sleep. They are out in the storm, checking the lines, inspecting the connections, trying to do something, anything to keep the harbor together. They are soaked to the skin. They are cold beyond anything they have ever felt. They are exhausted beyond reason. But they keep working. They keep working because if they stop, the harbor might die. The American Mulberry at Omaha Beach is taking the worst of it. The phoenixes there are not as well anchored as the British ones. The seabed is different, softer, less stable. The concrete giants are shifting, settling, moving under the pounding of the waves. The floating roadways are tearing loose from their moorings. The pier heads are breaking apart. The men on the American harbor watch in horror as weeks of work disintegrates before their eyes. A phoenix tips and slides and sinks at an angle, useless, destroyed. Another follows. Then another. The breakwater is failing. The harbor is dying. There is nothing they can do to stop it. The British harbor at Gold Beach is faring better. The phoenixes there are anchored in chalk, solid and stable. They shift a little, but they hold. The floating roadways flex and groan, but do not break. The pier heads rise and fall, but stay connected. The British harbor is surviving. But for how long? The storm shows no signs of abating. The wind is still rising. The waves are still growing. The men on the British harbor know that they are not safe. They know that the storm could still destroy them. They know that they are in a fight for their lives and the life of the harbor. They keep working. They keep fighting. They keep hoping. June 20th. The storm has been raging for 24 hours. The American mulberry is gone. The phoenixes are scattered across the beach, broken and useless. The floating roadways are twisted wreckage. The pier heads are at the bottom of the sea. The Americans who built it, who fought for it, who died for it, stand on the shore and watch the waves wash over the remains. They do not speak. There is nothing to say. The harbor is dead. The supplies that were supposed to flow through it will not flow. The men who were supposed to be supplied by it will have to find another way. The invasion has just suffered its worst disaster since D-Day. The British harbor is still standing, but it is wounded. Some of the phoenixes have shifted. Some of the roadways have broken. Some of the pier heads are damaged. The engineers work frantically to repair what they can, to reinforce what is left, to keep the harbor functioning. They work through the storm, through the wind and the waves and the rain. They work until they cannot work anymore, and then they work some more. They know that the entire invasion now depends on them. The American harbor is gone. The British harbor is all that remains. If it fails, there will be no way to supply the armies. The front lines will run out of fuel and ammunition and food. The Germans will counterattack. The invasion will stall. Everything they have fought for, everything they have built, everything they have sacrificed will be for nothing. June 21st. The storm is still blowing. The wind is at 40 knots now, a full gale. The waves are 15 feet high, crashing over the phoenixes, sweeping across the floating roadways. The men on the harbor cannot stand against them. They are forced to take shelter, to wait, to hope. They huddle in the few protected spots they can find, listening to the roar of the wind and the crash of the waves and the groaning of the structures that are all that stand between them and disaster. They pray. They do not pray often, most of them. But they pray now. They pray for the storm to end. They pray for the harbor to hold. They pray for the invasion to survive. June 22nd. The wind begins to ease. It drops to 30 knots, then 20, then 10. The waves subside. The sky lightens. The storm is over. The men emerge from their shelters and look at what is left. The British harbor is battered but alive. The phoenixes are still in place. The roadways are damaged but repairable. The pier heads are functioning. The harbor can be saved. The engineers set to work immediately, repairing, rebuilding, reinforcing. They know that every hour counts. They know that the supplies must flow. They know that the invasion depends on them. They work with a fury that matches the storm they just survived. The American harbor is beyond saving. The engineers survey the wreckage and shake their heads. The phoenixes are scattered across miles of beach. The roadways are twisted beyond repair. The pier heads are buried in sand. It would take weeks to rebuild, and they do not have weeks. They have days. The decision is made. The American Mulberry will be abandoned. All effort will be concentrated on the British harbor. It will become the sole supply point for the Allied armies in France. It will have to handle not only British supplies but American supplies as well. It will have to work twice as hard, handle twice as much, survive twice the strain. The engineers look at the British harbor and wonder if it can do it. They do not know. They hope. That is all they can do. Hope. The men on the British harbor do not have time to hope. They are too busy working. The repairs continue around the clock. Damaged roadways are replaced. Shifting phoenixes are stabilized. Broken connections are rewelded. The harbor is slowly brought back to life. Ships begin to unload again. Trucks begin to drive again. Supplies begin to flow again. The invasion, which teetered on the edge of disaster during the storm, is back on track. The door that almost closed is open again. The armies can move forward. But the cost has been enormous. The American Mulberry is gone. Millions of dollars of equipment, months of work, thousands of hours of labor are lost. The men who built it, who fought for it, who died for it, have to watch as the waves claim it. They stand on the beach and stare at the wreckage and try to understand what has happened. They try to understand why the storm came, why it destroyed their harbor, why it spared the British one. They try to understand the randomness of nature, the cruelty of fate, the indifference of the universe. They do not understand. They will never understand. They only know that they have lost something precious, something irreplaceable, something that can never be rebuilt. They carry that loss with them for the rest of their lives. The British harbor, now known as Mulberry Bey or Port Winston, becomes the lifeline of the invasion. Over the next several months, it will unload more than 2 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies. It will operate continuously until the deep-water ports are captured and repaired. It will prove that the engineers were right, that the impossible was merely difficult, that the door in the fortress could be built and could hold. It will become one of the great engineering achievements of the war, a monument to human ingenuity and human endurance and human courage. The men who built it do not think about monuments. They think about the next ship, the next load, the next truck. They think about getting through the day. They think about surviving. They think about going home. But they also think about something else. They think about the storm. They think about the wind and the waves and the night when the harbor almost died. They think about the Americans who lost everything. They think about the randomness of it all, the way the storm chose one harbor and spared the other. They think about the thin line between success and failure, between life and death, between victory and defeat. They think about these things, and they keep working. Because the war is not over, and the harbor must hold. Maggie the welder hears about the storm in the newsreels. She sees the footage of the wreckage, the scattered phoenixes, the twisted roadways. She recognizes her work in some of those images. She recognizes the welds, the steel, the concrete that she helped build. She knows that some of her phoenixes are lying broken on the beach at Omaha. She knows that months of her life, months of her labor, months of her hope are scattered across the sand. She feels something she cannot name. Grief, anger, resignation. She does not know. She only knows that she must keep working. There are more phoenixes to build. The harbor needs them. The war needs them. She picks up her torch and goes back to work. The storm of June 19th, 1944, is forgotten by most people. It is a footnote in the history books, a paragraph in the story of the invasion. But for the men who lived through it, it is never forgotten. It is the night when everything almost ended. It is the night when the door almost closed. It is the night when they learned that nature can be as cruel as any enemy, as destructive as any weapon, as deadly as any bullet. They carry that lesson with them forever. They carry the memory of the wind and the waves and the wreckage. They carry the knowledge that they survived, that the harbor survived, that the invasion survived. They carry it all, and they keep working, because the war is not over, and the harbor must hold. The numbers are almost too large to understand. By the end of August 1944, the Mulberry Harbor at Arromanches has unloaded more than 2 million men. 2 million soldiers, sailors, airmen, engineers, medics, chaplains, war correspondents, and all the other people who make an army function. 2 million human beings, each with a name, a face, a family somewhere waiting for them to come home. 2 million lives that passed through a harbor that did not exist before June 1944. 2 million stories that continued because the harbor was there. The vehicles are easier to count but no less staggering. 500,000 trucks, jeeps, tanks, ambulances, artillery pieces, bulldozers, and every other kind of machine that an army needs to move and fight and survive. 500,000 engines that rolled off the pier heads and onto the floating roadways and across the beach and into the battle for France. 500,000 drivers who steered those vehicles toward the front lines, knowing that without the fuel and ammunition that followed them, they would not get far. The supplies are measured in tons. 4 million tons. 4 million tons of fuel, ammunition, food, water, medicine, spare parts, boots, uniforms, bandages, blood plasma, cigarettes, chocolate, mail from home. 4 million tons of stuff, the mundane and the essential, the things that keep an army alive and moving and fighting. 4 million tons that had to cross the channel, and then cross the beach, and then cross France to reach the men who needed them. 4 million tons that could not have been delivered without the harbor. The harbor did not work alone. Behind it, under the channel, the pipelines of Operation Pluto were pumping fuel. By the end of the war, more than 170 million gallons of gasoline had flowed through those pipes. 170 million gallons. Enough to fill 250 Olympic swimming pools. Enough to drive every vehicle in the Allied armies from the beaches to Berlin and back again. Enough to prove that the engineers were right, that the fuel could flow under the sea, that the tankers could stay home, that the German bombers could not stop the lifeblood of the invasion. The men who built these things, the engineers and the workers and the planners, do not think in millions. They think in individual moments. They think about the first truck that drove off the pier head, the first time they saw their work actually working. They think about the storm, the night when everything almost ended, the moment when they realized that the harbor might survive after all. They think about the faces of the soldiers who passed through, the young men from Iowa and Yorkshire and Nova Scotia, who looked at the harbor with wonder and gratitude, and sometimes just exhaustion. They think about the ones who did not make it, the ones who died on the beach or in the water or somewhere inland, the ones who never got to use the harbor that was built for them. The war in Europe ends in May 1945. The news spreads across the continent like wildfire. In London, crowds gather in the streets to celebrate. In Paris, people dance under the Eiffel Tower. In Berlin, the survivors emerge from the rubble to begin the long work of rebuilding. And on the coast of Normandy, the Mulberry Harbor at Arromanches slowly falls silent. The last ship unloads. The last truck drives away. The last engineer packs his bags and heads for home. The harbor that saved the invasion is no longer needed. The deep-water ports have been captured and repaired. The supply lines run directly from France to the front. The Mulberry has done its job. It can rest now. But the harbor does not disappear. The phoenixes remain where they were sunk, massive concrete blocks protruding from the water, monuments to human ingenuity and human endurance. The floating roadways are salvaged, some of them, but the breakwaters stay. They stay for decades, for centuries, for as long as the sea will let them. They become part of the landscape, part of the history, part of the memory of the war. Fishermen navigate around them. Tourists photograph them. Schoolchildren learn about them. They are reminders of what happened here, of what was built here, of what was saved here. The men who built them return to their lives. They become farmers and factory workers and teachers and businessmen. They marry and have children and grow old. They do not talk much about the war. They do not talk about the harbors. They carry their memories quietly, privately, the way men of their generation carry everything. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows hard against the windows, they think about the storm. They think about the waves and the wind and the night, when the harbor almost died. They think about the men who did not come home. They think about the things they built and the things they lost and the things they saved. Maggie the welder goes back to Glasgow after the war. She marries a man she met at the shipyard. Another welder, another builder of things. They have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never talks about the war. Her children do not know what she did. They know she worked in a shipyard, but they do not know what she built. They do not know about the phoenixes. They do not know about the harbors. They do not know that their mother, their grandmother, their great-grandmother helped save the invasion. She keeps her secret. It is not a secret she was ordered to keep. It is a secret she chooses to keep because the memories are hers and hers alone, and she does not know how to share them with people who were not there. But one day, decades after the war, she sees a documentary on television. It is about the Mulberry Harbors. It shows footage of the phoenixes being built, being towed, being sunk. It shows the storm and the wreckage and the recovery. It shows the harbor at Arromanches, still standing, still visible from the shore. Maggie watches with her grandchildren. They do not know that she is in that footage somewhere, that her welds are holding those phoenixes together, that her hands helped build those concrete giants. They do not know. She does not tell them. She watches in silence, and she remembers. She remembers the cold and the exhaustion and the fear. She remembers the pride and the hope and the determination. She remembers the boys on the beaches, the ones she never met, but built for anyway. She remembers everything. And when the documentary is over, she gets up and makes tea and does not say a word. The harbor at Arromanches is still there today. Visitors can walk along the shore and see the remains of the phoenixes, half submerged, weathered by decades of waves and wind. They can imagine what it must have looked like in the summer of 1944, the busiest port in the world, the door that opened Europe to liberation. They can read the plaques and look at the photographs and try to understand what happened here. But they cannot truly understand. They cannot understand what it felt like to be there, to build it, to fight for it, to watch it almost die in the storm. They cannot understand because they were not there. Only the men and women who lived it can understand. And they are almost all gone now. The last of the Mulberry engineers dies in the early years of the 21st century. He is 102 years old. He has outlived his wife, his friends, most of his children. He lives in a nursing home in the south of England, in a room with a view of the sea. He does not talk much anymore. His mind wanders. But sometimes when the nurses come to check on him, they find him staring out the window at the water, his eyes focused on something far away. They ask him what he is looking at. He does not answer. He is looking at the channel. He is looking at the place where 60 years ago he helped build a harbor. He is looking at the door he helped open. He is looking at the waves that almost killed him, and the concrete that saved him, and the memory that will not let him go. He is looking at his life's work, the thing he built that outlasted him, the monument that the sea has not yet claimed. He is looking at the Mulberry, and he is at peace. The story of the Mulberry Harbors is not a story of famous generals or dramatic battles. It is a story of engineers and workers, of welders and tug crews, of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. It is a story of concrete and steel and the human will to build. It is a story of a door built in a fortress that had no doors. It is a story of victory, not just on the beaches of Normandy, but in the minds and hearts of the people who made that victory possible. It is a story that deserves to be remembered. The storm of June 1944 is long past. The war is long over. The men and women who built the harbors are gone. But the phoenixes remain. They remain in the water off Arromanches, silent sentinels watching over the shore. They remain in the photographs and the films and the history books. They remain in the memories of the families who still tell the stories, who still pass down the names and the faces and the deeds. They remain as a testament to what ordinary people can achieve when they are faced with an impossible task. They remain as a reminder that the greatest victories are often won not by soldiers with guns, but by engineers with plans, and workers with tools, and ordinary people with the will to build. The door is open. It has never closed. And as long as the phoenixes stand in the water off Normandy, as long as the story is told, as long as anyone remembers what happened here, the door will stay open. It will stay open for the generations to come, for the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the people who built it. It will stay open as a symbol of what humanity can achieve when it works together, when it refuses to accept impossibility, when it builds doors in fortresses that have none. It will stay open forever.